One of the main habitat management practices that landowners have me do when I come out to their properties is cut in bedding areas. Now, I've been doing this for quite a few years, so I've really built my confidence when it comes to laying out and cutting in a bedding area. But when I first started doing this, I definitely made a lot of mistakes. So today I want to talk about the 5 most common bedding area mistakes that I made early on, and these are also mistakes that I often see landowners make. Number 1, and by far the most common one I see, is you got a spot going to nowhere. As in, you cut a trail, you made a bed, and it dead ends. It goes to nowhere. So here's a trail. This is one of my own bedding cuts on our own farm. Now what happened here is this big old maple fell and it completely cut off this trail. So this trail used to cut through here, and I think I had a bed tucked right up over there with a couple of nice escapes. Well, now this trail completely dead ended. So even though it's open going up to this trail, there is no chance that a deer is going to use this area. So what I need to do when I come back in here next summer and clean up my bedding area, I need to cut this back open. And I do that every single year in my bedding cuts. I go in them once a year, always in June, because that's when the herbaceous stuff is growing. So if there's thistle or things like that I don't like that are growing in my bedding areas, I can spray them back. I can spray back any of the other nasty plants that I don't want. And I get in here, I have my chainsaw, I have my backpack sprayer, and then I also have my brush saw, and I clean out these bedding areas. But I'll definitely clean this one out because it completely dead ends. You want as much space as humanly possible for the deer to move around. The more access trails you have running through the bedding cut, the more spots they can slip out, they can escape, the more deer are going to use it. If you make them feel boxed in, I can assure you they will go around the bedding cut rather than go in it. So you want tons of trails, and you want nothing like that. No dead ends. Another common mistake is just putting the bedding areas in the wrong spot. So deer like to bed in a flat spot. This bedding cut up here is a nice flat point at the top of a hill. Deer also like to bed on benches on the side of a ridge. They like to bed in flat bottoms. They like to bed off of points. They like to bed on transition zones, like between hardwoods in a marsh, islands in a marsh. There's lots of locations like that where deer like to bed. Deer do not like to bed where there's too much slope. So this area was logged. If I were to intentionally set up bedding, let's say I did a bunch of hinge cuts or things like that right on this ridge, that would not work as deer bedding. So this will blow up, and I'm fine with that because it's going to act as screening for my main bedding right up here. But I do not anticipate that deer will be bedding on here because they do not like to bed where there is too much slope. If there's a slight amount of slope, you can get some deer to bed on there. If there's any type of benches along the edge of this ridge, they will definitely bed on that, but they are not going to bed where there is a heavy amount of slope to it. So I made that mistake. I've cut on the side of the hill expecting to get some deer bedding, and they just don't use it. When you're cutting on hillsides, you're doing it more as like a screen for other bedding that you have. The other thing to keep in mind is when you set up a bedding area, you got to also think about where your access is. If you're going to be accessing nearby that bedding area at a time when the deer will be in the bedding, that's not a good thing. So if you have to walk right by bedding on your way to like an evening stand location, that's not a good thing. You don't want to be accessing near bedding in the evening when the deer will be in it. Now, if you're going out to stand early in the morning, the deer should be out on those destination food sources. So you can access closer to bedding in the morning because in theory, they shouldn't be in there yet. You shouldn't be hunting the mornings really until the rut anyway, so they should be out running around in those big open food sources all night. But if you're putting bedding in a spot where you're going to be accessing close by at the wrong time, that's going to be counterproductive. It's better to not have the bedding at all than to be bumping deer. Here's one that I see a lot. The bedding area is just way too trashed. There are just not trails through it. It is way too thick. Now if you completely trash a bedding area, or you just cut a ton of trees, but you don't go back through and do the maintenance that's needed, and it's too thick, the deer aren't going to use it. I would say over half the time that I'm cutting in a bedding area is spent doing the cleanup work. If you cut in a bedding area, well, if you cut and you don't cut trails through it, you didn't cut in a bedding area. All you did is make a tornado zone, and what the deer are going to do is they're going to go around it. Now, I've done cuts like that where I just completely trash an area, and I know the deer won't go in it, but I do that when I'm trying to force deer a different direction. So I'll create those tornado zones if it helps to make a pinch near a bow stand or something like that. But if you cut in an area and it is completely too trashed, completely too thick, the deer will not use it. And I see this mistake a lot. Keep in mind, for every tree you cut, you're going to spend at least as much time going back through and doing cleanup work. Another one I see a lot that I've made a lot myself is just making the trails through the bedding area too narrow. Now this trail right here is borderline too narrow. These were ironwood, which died. They often die. What I can do now is I should just go through and cut these out and open this trail up a little bit, because I am not seeing much for deer sign through here. So that's telling me that the deer aren't using this trail. It just got too narrow. You want more open in your bedding areas. It should be easy for you to walk through. So now we got in here. This is definitely more open, and there is deer sign in here. The deer have been using this trail. You can see as I look that direction, it's nice and wide open. So big open trails. I mean, you don't have to go like mulcher big. That might be a little too big, but give yourself 3 to 4 feet and plenty of open space. The deer do not want to feel boxed in, like I said earlier. So give them room to roam. Like even right here, it pinches down a little bit, and a lot of that is because this was open and my regen is taking off here. So it's starting to get a little bit thicker, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of maintenance work in this bedding area to clean it up. So nice big wide open trails. Don't make them feel too boxed in. And the last one is just hinging the wrong trees. So there are certain trees that just do not hinge very well. Now like here, I did some hard maples and dead, and pretty sure it's dead. So it's not the end of the world if the tree dies, right? So sometimes I hinge a tree like these hard maples. I hinged it on purpose because I knew there was probably a 90% chance the tree would die. I do the same thing with ironwood. Sometimes I'll hinge them, but they're pretty good chance they'll die. Sometimes they stay alive. But I'll hinge them even knowing they're going to die, because it still props up that cover for quite a few years and lets the regen grow up through that treetop. The treetop kind of acts like a seclusion cage. So I get, if I have oaks around, I really like doing this, because then the oaks rain down the acorns in those treetops, and it protects those new oak trees from deer browse. So there's purpose to sometimes hinging the wrong trees, but there are other trees like aspen in particular that I pretty much never hinge, because the best benefit from an aspen tree is getting the regeneration that you get off the root system when you flush cut it. So I mean, if you go back and watch my videos, sometimes on some of those smaller trees, as I'm cutting a ton of aspen, I might just kind of let them tip over, and there might be just a little sliver of a hinge left on there, but that tree's going to die right away, and I'll still get the regeneration. But I've been out to properties where guys intentionally hinge aspen, and that's just something that you should never go in with the purpose of hinging an aspen tree, because it's not going to hinge. It's not going to stay alive, and you get far more benefit from the aspen regen than you do from the aspen regen than you do from the hinged tree. So there are only certain species that hinge well. The ones that I focus on when I'm doing bedding cuts, mainly box elder. They're the best hinging tree that I have. The smaller basswood hinge just fine. The ash hinge are kind of marginal. Elm hinge phenomenal. Got a nice rub. And then, like I said, hard maple and ironwood all hinge here and there. But even in areas where I have a lot of trees that hinge well, when I'm setting up a bedding cut, I'm sure I never exceed 25% of the trees. It's probably more like 10 to 20% of the trees in the bedding cut actually get hinged. So keep that in mind too. I guess I could have added that into my mistakes. Is guys will hinge the wrong type of trees, and they'll also hinge cut far too much. So there's your bonus tip. hinge cutting far too much. Less is more when it comes to hinge cutting. It is a great tool, and it puts great structure into your bedding areas, but don't overdo it, because if you overdo it, it's going to be too thick and the deer aren't going to want to use it, and you're going to think hinge cutting sucks. So really, when you're hinging trees, your main purpose is to create some cover, so they have cover off to the sides and they can feel secure. And then every now and then, if you got the right type of tree, to kind of create that canopied bed where they can tuck up underneath. But you should, your goal should never be to go into an area and hinge every single tree. I like to leave plenty of trees that I don't hinge, because then I get the stump sprouting, and as I've said a million times, that is the best forage in the woods, when that old root system is feeding that and all those new stump sprouts. It is exceedingly nutrient dense forage. So, all right, I think that's all I got for today, man. It looks like I got some cleanup to do in this bedding area. Another fallen down tree. At least they can jump over this one. You all take care. God bless.